Joe Biden has a sit-down interview with Stephanopoulos. Joe Biden is asked by Stephanopoulos whether or not Putin is a killer. He says, yes, Putin is a killer. Now, think for the moment of how weird that statement is. Think back over the time of all the presidents in your living memory. Can you, outside of Trump, think of any president that has ever called another world leader a killer? And this is despite the fact that Joe Biden is friends with Saudi Arabia, friends with Erdogan. The United States has been friends with basically terrorists, or for that matter, authoritarians and dictators around the globe without any issue at all. And think of how weird it is for the media person who should know at least the last 10, 15, 20 years of history to not ask Joe Biden, but sir, aren't you a killer by that same standard? It doesn't come up. They move on to the next question. I guess I'm making the point that it is a degrading or a degradation of our politics, where we have basically Trump on the Democratic side acting the same way. The wild part is, I would make the argument, though, it's worse with Joe Biden. Donald Trump could love you one moment, then come out the next minute and say, you're a great friend of mine. It all was ego, and it was all ludicrous on some level. He was clownish. But the problem is, Joe Biden will be consistent with that particular Trumpian point of view, where he would go out and basically say something like that about another world leader. There's a tact, there's a formality in the way that leaders tend to interact with each other in order to not allow hostilities to basically flourish. There's also a certain degree of respect that leaders typically show to one another, because you don't necessarily want to have these kind of back and forth and degrading of the leader when their population may look at the thing that you said and take great offense to that. Hell, their population may even use that as propaganda to show how low class you are in the context of their own countries. The formality is not necessarily coming out of nowhere. It's the same thing where it's somewhat of a hot rail to touch on the election stuff. I guess my issue here is that the hypocrisy of it. It's not so much that I don't believe that Putin will make a choice that would get people killed. He's a leader of a country. All leaders of countries make those choices. I think my issue here is more so that Joe Biden being the person to pursue this case, the United States being the country that is saying something like this, is utterly astonishing. Donald Trump had Soleimani executed, basically, assassinated, murdered. And they basically had him come there out of this notion of peace overtures, and then had the guy whacked and murdered at that point. Imagine John Kerry going into a country and having that person whacked. But the difference is, we don't consider other people's leaders to be of same value, of same worth, and deserving of the same respect as our own. And so if there's a leader in Iran, and Iran is on our naughty list, he is fair game to die. And the population in the country would say, okay, we wouldn't even care. It's astonishing. Look at the way we're talking about Chinese people. Look at the way we've talked about Chinese people for the last several years. Those things were so jaded and so out of proportion to the reality of those events. It's not said that, oh, Chinese people are taking our jobs. The Chinese people are not taking your jobs. The companies decided that they can make a profit by getting rid of your job, sending that job overseas. That's them making a profit off of you, your destitution. That has nothing to do with China. That virus was not the quote-unquote China virus in the way that Donald Trump made it, and the Chinese people weren't getting on airplanes in order to infect you, regardless of what Donald Trump says is not true. The hysteria that is directed outside of the country for things that are internal to the country are phenomenal. 500,000 people die from COVID, and we blame China. That's astonishing. I'm making a point that many of these things are entirely internal. They put out an intelligence report, and it is accepted by mainstream media entirely uncritically. And on top of it being accepted uncritically, it basically says all of our enemies are out to get us. Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. And not only are all of our enemies out to get us, none of our allies are spying on us at all. Not even Israel, who is spying on us. I mean, this is ludicrous. They put this stuff out, and the American public is supposed to accept this as some level of truth. What they're talking about is basically conversations, things that the people are saying, things that the networks and the media may be saying. That's what they're talking about. And that's what they're expanding to the level of electoral interference. They don't even tell you how they know what they know or how they got some of the information. You just have to take their word for it. The New York Times even reports, we have no idea how they came up with this. But they say it's totally on point. I love that. I need to be able to say that. I'm not going to tell you I came up with this information, but you can trust my word, like the word of God. And they're like, okay, fair enough. Well, he said it's perfect information. It's just shocking, that's all. When is the last time you've heard a leader, especially in this country, talk like that about any other leader? You could say that Donald Trump debased our politics to a point where that becomes okay. By the same token, what Donald Trump is has nothing to do with Joe Biden. And I would make the point that all those years of the Russiagate hysteria made it perfectly possible for him to say just that. Because the Democratic Party will look at it with all of the anger and hostility and xenophobia in the world that statement was perfectly just. If the same thing was said about an American president in another country, people would be greatly pissed off. And they would be calling it low class, low brow, tactless in the same way that I am doing right now. It's not just low brow and tactless and somewhat embarrassing for another American president to act like a buffoon. There's also this other element of ludicrousness to it, since all of our presidents have been killers. Obama dropped 26,000 bombs in his last year in office. What do you think was happening to those bombs? That they were turning into flowers? We don't have any idea how many people Donald Trump murdered because the bombs that Donald Trump were somewhat hidden for the most part. Biden was in office with Obama. And you might say, well, Biden doesn't have any culpability when he was with Obama. Okay, fair enough, but he damn sure has it when he was in Congress. And I'm telling you, killer, willingly, knowingly, a killer, and a mass killer. So Joe Biden's sitting there acting as if that other group is the problem. And the mainstream media with the American perspective never once coming to the conclusion of, hey, isn't that a little bit hypocritical? I'm going to show you the comment, and I'm going to show you Putin's response. This is one of the most ludicrous things ever, and it gets across how ridiculous American media is. The moment that American media doesn't say, well, wait a minute, sir, aren't you a killer too? That means every last ounce and bit of context had just been dropped in that moment. And the American public was dumber in that moment watching that clip because the other person didn't turn around and make the point that we also act in these ways. The reason it's important not to drop context is because it gives you a jaded point of view. In fact, it's using you as a useful idiot with the point of view that they're giving you because they're not giving you all of the information. They want you to come to a particular conclusion thinking that you came to that conclusion, when really the information that they gave you incentivized you into a direction that was just wrong. Despite the fact that you think you're a person, you're making the decisions and everything else, at the end of the day, you've just been manipulated. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you the opportunity for allowing me to do it. Joe Biden, tactless as ever.
Mm-hmm. I do.
So what price must he pay?
The price he's going to pay, well, you'll see shortly. He will pay a price. We had a long talk, he and I. I know him relatively well. And the conversation started off, I said, I know you and you know me. If I establish this occurred, then be prepared.
You said you know he doesn't have a soul.
I did say that to him, yes.
I mean, just think about that. He doesn't have a soul. He's a killer. He doesn't have a soul. What does that mean? What is he, the devil? He's a Nazi? What are you calling him? I mean, at the end of the day, if he's that, what are you? You've just murdered 22 Iraqis within, what, less than 60 days, 70 days in office? What are you? Aren't you not a mass murderer? And by the way, just to put this in fine detail, the New York Times is always awesome in the way that it puts things. U.S. strikes in Syria targeted Iran-backed militias that rocketed American troops in Iraq. Let's just step through this again. U.S. strikes in Syria, a country we don't belong, and that we got 500,000 people killed by our actions in an administration that Joe Biden was vice president and helping making the decisions. Targeted Iran-backed militias, put a pin in that one for a moment, Iran-backed militias, that rocketed American troops in Iraq. Let's go down for a bit. And we get to see he carried out airstrikes, right? Authorized, right? February 15th, right. The strikes were just over Syria for diplomatic blowback. The U.S. strikes on Thursday, blah, 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 right. Now, he killed 22 people. They were all Iraqis. Little is known about the group, including whether it's backed by Iran or related to organizations that use the facility the American strikes targeted on Thursday. So put this in perspective. Joe Biden struck a sovereign country that he doesn't supposed to be in, has no authority to be in, is breaking international law by being there, and those airstrikes, dodgy at best, meaning illegal. He's trying to hit Iran-backed militias that they don't even know if they're related to Iran. That is great. That's great. Let me see. American officials said the airstrikes were relatively small. I like the way they said that. They just only killed 22 people. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? So, I was looking for something specific, but it's a moot point. Putin responds to this. Before I show you Putin's response for the moment, Joe Biden was in the decision-making, in a strong decision-making position during the Iraq War. Now, did Joe Biden know what was taking place in regards to the Iraq War? He was for that war. He was pushing for that war. He wanted Saddam out. He was okay for the sanctions. In fact, he was a strong advocate for the sanctions. This is Albright. Listen to what she says about sanctions.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
500,000 children. Think about that. One human being looks you in the face and says 500,000 kids have died. Children, innocent babies, died. Do you think it's worth it? Yes. Yes, I do, because they're not my kids. Biden, being one of the strong proponents of the war, gets caught saying this. Come on, where is it? Right here.
I think you and I believe, and many of us believe here, as long as Saddam's at the helm, there is no reasonable prospect you or any other inspector is ever going to be able to guarantee that we have rooted out, root and branch, the entirety of Saddam's program relative to weapons of mass destruction. And you and I both know, and all of us here really know, and it's the thing we have to face, that the only way we're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein is we're going to end up having to start it alone, and it's going to require guys like you in uniform to be back.
Just to make this clear, 1 million people died in that war. 1 million people died in that war. I am always astonished at the way that American politicians can talk as if they're absolved of all of the consequences of their actions, and that the U.S. media will talk with them as if they're absolved of all the consequences of their actions. It's an astonishing thing about American media. It's very profound. I would imagine that's why Psaki says, you guys aren't propagandists at all. Yeah, I guess you wouldn't say that, considering they're the ones who are giving you a pass on this nonsense. Whatever you want to think, that this is a degradation of our politics. That's the main point I'm trying to make here. And for the last part, Scott Ritter, the guy who he was talking to there, Ritter makes the point to him that, look, it is not clear that Saddam Hussein is making or producing weapons of mass destruction. And Ritter was right. It wasn't clear because he wasn't making weapons of mass destruction. We, with people like Biden voting and pushing hard for it, invaded a country, killed 1 million people. And before we invaded that country, we passed sanctions that killed 500,000 kids, let alone how many adults. And you are going to get on television and say that somebody else is a killer. And the media of the country is so comically inept, so brainwashed, useful idiots of the political class, if not just biased actors in and of itself, will go out and print it without a hint of response going the other way. Meaning without any criticism of the comment, without any questions about whether you should be saying this to another country with that many nuclear weapons, whether you want to have some level of relations with the other country, or even whether you also fit the bill, considering you just got in office and murdered 22 people that you don't even know if they're affiliated with the group to which you were trying to murder them from. The wild part is, it's not the comment that bothers me. It's the fact that mainstream media acts as if Joe Biden is somehow different. How do you kill 1 million people and call somebody else a murderer, and your media doesn't even ask the question? Just profound to me. Let's hear Putin's response.
Теперь, что касается заявления моего американского коллеги. Мы действительно, как он сказал, мы с ним лично знакомы. И что бы я ему ответил? Я бы сказал ему: будьте здоровы. Я желаю ему здоровья.
Okay, this is probably not going to be helpful to you, so I'm just going to read what he says as he says it. Let's go back to the beginning. So, as a statement from my American colleague, as he said, know each other personally, what would I answer him? I would tell him, be healthy. I wish him good health. I say it without irony or as a joke. This is my first point. Secondly, if we talked in more detail about the subject, this is what I would like to say. In the history of every nation, every state, there are many very difficult, dramatic, and bloody events. But when we evaluate other people, or when we evaluate even other states, other nations, we always seem to look at ourselves as in a mirror. We always see ourselves there. because we always see our own traits in other people and think they are how we really are. His sweep around your own front door. And he basically makes the point that, look in the mirror, buddy. You're talking about us, but in retrospect, you're actually talking about yourself. And how is he wrong? Any honest media would regard that statement as being true. You would probably only see somewhat of a truncated aspect of this, and the conversation you probably get around this statement will probably be derisive to Vladimir Putin, especially if it's going to be on MSNBC, despite the fact that the statement is true. I think the best statement ever was by Cuomo on CNN when she's talking to Jill Stein. And he makes the point about Jill Stein basically says, look, we should be more contextual and well-rounded when we talk about these items so the American public can get a fair understanding of the world, basically. And Chris Cuomo, was it Chris? Yeah, the newsman, basically makes the point like, look, it is not your job to give a contextual point of view. Your job is to give an American perspective. And that's basically all of this. It's an American perspective. And it's one that basically denigrates reality for the sake of pushing a particular point of view. It's aggravating as all fuck. And yet, it's here. This statement right here by Joe Biden. And the fact that this statement is not being condemned, or for that matter, ridiculed viciously, considering America's own history, recent history, is problematic, pathetic, sad, and gets across the level of hypocrisy and the level of imagination that this country is functioning in. Joe Biden saying that Putin is a killer should be an embarrassment, every bit as much as when Donald Trump is out there screaming Rocket Man. They don't see it that way. They thought the Rocket Man thing was embarrassing. They think this is perfectly okay. Yeah. Both of these people sides are in a cult. I'll leave it at that. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Biden has murdered more people in 50 days than Putin has in 15 years. The wild part about it is, how do you back sanctions that kill 500,000 kids and then get on television and call somebody else a killer? Well, for that matter, how do you sit in an administration that started the Yemen war, Libyan war, Syrian war? How do you be an administration that get all of those people killed and still can say that guy is a killer? How do you get in office and within 30 days you end up killing 22 people from a group that you don't even know if it's affiliated with the group that you are trying to attack? It's absurd. And if you had an honest media, they would have called it that. The Stephanopoulos would have used that question purely as a way to hit Biden when he put out the propaganda. But Biden is perfectly free to walk with his cock swinging in a situation like this, and nobody's going to tell him that he has no pants on. Like, share, subscribe.